When I found my wife affair with my father, my world collapsed. Then DNA test changed everything. In a single moment, my world came crashing down. The boy I had raised, the son I had loved, was not mine. Listeners, share your view about this story in comments section. And subscribe. My channel for more interesting stories. Nathan Carter had always believed that life was built with two things: grit and sacrifice. It was a belief ingrained in him from the very first time he wrapped his small fingers around wrench, standing inside a rundown garage on the rough side of Fairview. He was only a teenager back then, wearing oil-stained jeans and an oversized t-shirt, his hands blackened with grease as he worked late into the evenings. It wasn't just about fixing cars. It was about fixing his life, about ensuring his future was different from the past he had inherited. Nathan grew up without a father, a shadow of a man who had walked away before his son could even form full sentences. His mother, Linda Carter, never spoke much about him. Maybe it was pain, or maybe it was anger. Either way, she filled the silence with long hours at the local diner, working double shifts to keep food on the table. Nathan learned early that he could only rely on himself. His world was simple: work hard, build something, and never abandon the people you love. Unlike most kids his age, Nathan never dreamed of escaping Fairview. He dreamed of conquering it. At 15, he took his first job sweeping floors at Roper's Auto Repair, inhaling the scent of motor oil and sweat, listening to the old mechanics talk about their glory days as they fixed rusted engines. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. While his classmates spent their evenings at football games or house parties, Nathan spent his in the dim glow of the garage, hands deep in carburetors and engines, eyes set on a future he could control. But fate has a cruel sense of humor, and it was during those long hours at Roper's that his story truly began. One evening, just as the sun cast a warm orange glow over the town, Emma Sullivan walked into the garage. She wasn't the kind of girl who demanded attention, but something about her made people notice. Maybe it was the way she carried herself with quiet confidence, or the way her eyes held both curiosity and kindness. "Hey, aren't you the guy from Roper's?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Nathan, caught off guard, nearly dropped the wrench in his hand. Yeah, I work here part-time," he replied, trying and failing to sound smooth. Emma smiled, leaning against the counter. "I thought so. My dad's the one with the old Ford pickup that's always breaking down. You fixed it last week." He chuckled, shaking his head. "That thing's held together with prayers and duct tape." She laughed. A soft, genuine sound that made something in his chest tighten. It was the first time in a long time that Nathan forgot about work, about his responsibilities, about the weight he carried. They talked about everything and nothing: school, the best burger places in town, and the way Fairview always smelled like rain after sunset. When she pulled a crumpled napkin from her pocket and scribbled her number on it, Nathan knew his life had just changed forever. He had built his world on discipline, on control. But Emma was the first thing in his life that felt like a risk worth taking. Nathan and Emma's relationship was effortless at first, the kind of love that felt like it was meant to be. They spent weekends at the town's old drive-in theater, shared milkshakes at the diner where his mother worked, and took long walks under the glow of Fairview's streetlights, dreaming of the future. Nathan had never been one for big words or grand gestures, but he made Emma laugh, and that was enough. She, in turn, filled his life with warmth in a way he never knew he needed. While most of their classmates focused on college applications and getting out of Fairview, Nathan's future was already set in his mind. He wasn't the type to sit in a lecture hall. He wanted to build something with his hands. He enrolled in a community college's automotive program, taking night classes while working full-time at Roper's garage. Meanwhile, Emma found her own path, working as a receptionist at a local dentist's office. They weren't rich, but they were happy. They were building something together, step by step. By the time Nathan was in his early 20s, he had saved enough money to take a leap of faith. Mr. Roper, the garage's aging owner, was ready to retire. And Nathan, through hard work and sheer determination, managed to buy out his shares. Overnight, the faded old shop was reborn as Carter's Auto Repair. Owning a business wasn't easy, though. The work was endless, and Nathan threw himself into it with everything he had. 10-hour shifts turned into 14. He was too busy to notice how Emma's smiles began to fade, how her laughter became rarer, how the warmth in her eyes dimmed. At first, she was understanding. She supported his dreams, reassured him that hard work now meant a better future later. But love is more than just patience. It's about presence. The first time she brought it up was over dinner one night. "You're never home anymore," she said, setting down her fork. "We don't even talk." Nathan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Emma, you know I'm doing this for us. The shop's still new. If I don't put in the time, it won't survive." "I know," she said softly, forcing a small smile. "I just miss you, that's all." He promised her that things would get better, that this was just a phase. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had built his entire life on fixing things. And yet, he had no idea how to fix this. And then, his father returned. It was a regular evening at the garage, the scent of motor oil and burnt rubber clinging to Nathan's clothes when his phone rang. The number was unknown. "Hello?" he answered, barely paying attention as he wiped grease from his hands. There was a pause. Then a deep, rough voice spoke. "Hey, kid, it's me, your father." Nathan froze. His heart pounded in his chest, his grip tightening around the wrench in his hand. His father. A man he hadn't seen in over 20 years. He had no memories of Robert Carter other than faint images of a shadow passing through his childhood. Whispers between his mother and grandmother, stories half told, but never fully explained. The man had walked out on them when Nathan was barely old enough to understand what a father was. His mother never spoke about him. Not once. "What do you want?" Nathan asked, voice cold. Robert let out a small, humorless chuckle. "Straight to the point, huh? Just thought maybe we could talk." Nathan felt something inside him twist. Anger, confusion, suspicion. "Talk?" he repeated, his jaw clenching. "You disappeared for 2 decades and now you want to talk?" Robert sighed. "I know I don't deserve it. I screwed up, Nathan. I let things get out of control. But I've changed. I just want a chance to know my son again." Nathan almost laughed at the audacity. His son? "I don't have a father," he said bitterly, "and I don't need one." He was about to hang up when Robert added quickly, "I know about your business. You're doing well for yourself. I'm proud of you." Nathan's stomach churned. "How do you know that?" he demanded. Robert hesitated, then admitted, "I've been in town for a few weeks. I've seen your shop. You've built something good." Nathan's hands shook with frustration. This man, this stranger, had been lurking around his life, watching from a distance, instead of reaching out like a normal human being. Against his better judgment, curiosity gnawed him. "Fine," he muttered. "You want to talk? Meet me at Joe's Diner tomorrow at noon." "All right," Robert said, relief evident in his voice. "See you then, son." Nathan hung up. Son. The word felt foreign coming from him. When he told Emma later that night, she stared at him, wide-eyed. "Your father? Are you sure?" "Yeah," Nathan muttered, running a hand over his face. It was him. He knew things. Things only he would know. Emma hesitated, her expression unreadable. "Are you going to meet him?" "I have to." Emma nodded slowly, but didn't look convinced. "Just be careful. People don't change overnight, Nate," he scoffed. "I doubt he's changed at all, but deep down, a small part of him hoped he was wrong." The next afternoon, Nathan pulled into the parking lot of Joe's Diner. The small, old-fashioned restaurant sat at the edge of town, a relic of the past with its faded neon sign flickering against the afternoon sun. He sat in his truck for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, his mind racing. Why was he here? What did he expect? An apology? Closure? With a deep breath, he got out and stepped inside. The diner smelled like coffee, bacon, and something greasy on the grill. A handful of customers sat in booths chatting over their meals. Nathan's gaze swept the room until he spotted a man sitting alone in the corner. Robert Carter. He looked older, rougher, worn down by life. His hair had more gray than black, his face lined with wrinkles that suggested years of bad choices. But the eyes, the piercing blue eyes, were the same ones Nathan saw in the mirror every morning. Robert looked up, and a small, cautious smile flickered across his face. "Nathan." Nathan slid into the seat across from him, his posture stiff. "Robert." He refused to call him Dad. A waitress approached. "Coffee?" Nathan nodded. Robert did, too. The silence between them stretched as they waited. Robert tapped his fingers against the tabletop, looking as if he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Finally, he sighed. "You look good, son." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Don't call me that." Robert raised his hands in surrender. "Fair enough. I want to make things right." Nathan scoffed. "You can't. You left. For 20 years. You missed everything." Robert exhaled slowly. "I know, I was a coward. I screwed up, got mixed up in bad things. Did some time." Nathan stared at him. "Prison?" Robert nodded. "Yeah." The waitress returned, setting 2 cups of coffee on the table. Nathan wrapped his hands around his mug, his head spinning. He should have walked out. He should have told this man to go to hell. But something kept him glued to the seat. "So why now?" Nathan asked, his voice low. "Why come back?" Robert took a sip of coffee before answering. "I heard about you, saw your business. You've done well for yourself, and I don't know. I guess I wanted to see it for myself. Maybe be part of your life. If you'll let me." Nathan studied him carefully. There was something off. "Do you need money?" Robert flinched, then shook his head. "Number, that's not why I'm here." Nathan wasn't convinced. "Look, Shh, Robert continued. "I know I have no right to ask for anything. But I'd like a second chance. A chance to prove that I'm not the man I used to be." Nathan leaned back, crossing his arms. "That's not how life works. You don't just walk back in and expect things to be okay. Robert nodded, his face solemn. I know, but maybe we can start small, grab a beer sometime, talk a little. Nathan didn't know why, but he hesitated. Maybe because, despite everything, there was still a small pathetic part of him that wanted to believe his father could change. Maybe, he muttered. Robert smiled, but his eyes flickered with something unreadable. That should have been the moment Nathan walked away for good. But he didn't. And that decision would come back to haunt him in ways he never could have imagined. Nathan didn't fully trust Robert, but against his better judgment, he allowed him small glimpses into his life. At first, it was just casual meetups. A coffee here, a quick chat there. But Robert had a way of inching closer, finding ways to stay just on the edge of Nathan's world without fully stepping in. He started dropping by the garage, unannounced, offering advice to the younger mechanics, watching Nathan work with an eerie sort of pride. Nathan caught him lingering too long, asking too many questions about his home life, about his wife, about the things that made him vulnerable. At first, Sarah was cautious, but polite. "He's your father," she told Nathan one evening as they sat in the living room, their baby sleeping in the nursery. "Maybe this is good for you." Nathan wanted to believe that, but something felt off. And then Robert started visiting Sarah when Nathan wasn't around. It was little things at first, offering to fix something around the house, dropping by with a box of pastries because he happened to be in the area. Nathan shrugged it off, chalking it up to an old man trying too hard to make up for lost time. But Sarah became distant. She started making small excuses. "I'm just tired. I think I'll stay in tonight." "You don't need to rush home from work." Nathan ignored the warning screaming in the back of his mind. One afternoon, Nathan came home earlier than expected. He was supposed to be at the shop for another 2 hours, but something in his gut had told him to leave. He parked his truck in the driveway and walked through the front door. That's when he saw them, Sarah and Robert, standing too close in the kitchen. Too familiar. Too comfortable. Sarah's expression went pale when she saw Nathan. Robert, on the other hand, merely smirked. Nathan felt something inside him snap. "What the hell is going on?" Sarah jumped back, shaking her head. "It's not what it looks like." But Nathan wasn't looking at her anymore. His gaze was locked on Robert, who simply crossed his arms, his smirk deepening. "You should have known, son," Robert murmured. "You were never man enough for her." Nathan lunged. Nathan's vision blurred with fury as he charged at Robert, his fist clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The betrayal was a living thing, clawing at his chest, making it hard to breathe. Robert, however, didn't flinch. Instead, he took a slow step back, his smirk never faltering. "Easy there, son. Wouldn't want to do something you regret." Sarah grabbed Nathan's arm, her grip weak, trembling. "Nathan, please listen to me." I yanked his arm away, his eyes burning as he glared at her. "Listen to what? Another lie? Another excuse?" His voice cracked with the weight of disbelief. Sarah's lips parted as if she wanted to say something to justify the unjustifiable. But the words never came. And then Robert chuckled. A low, dark sound, as if he were enjoying this moment more than anything else. "You know, Nathan," Robert said, crossing his arms, "you should really learn to keep a closer eye on the people you love." Nathan's stomach twisted. He felt sick. His father, his own flesh and blood, was mocking him. Robert turned to Sarah, tilting his head slightly. Should we tell him? Or do you want to keep playing the loyal wife? Sarah's face drained of color. Nathan took a step forward. His chest rose and fell with deep, angry breaths. Tell me what? Robert sighed dramatically, then shoved his hands into his pockets as if what he was about to say was nothing more than casual conversation. I think it's time you knew the truth, son. That baby you're so proud of? He leaned in slightly, his smirk widening. He's mine. The room tilted. Nathan felt like the floor beneath him had shattered, sending him plummeting into darkness. His mind couldn't process the words, couldn't accept them. It was impossible. It had to be a lie. He turned to Sarah, begging with his eyes for her to deny it, to tell him Robert was lying. But Sarah didn't say a word. She just stood there, her hands trembling, her eyes glossy with guilt and shame. Nathan staggered back, his legs weak beneath him. No, that's not possible. Robert shrugged. DNA doesn't lie, kid. I made sure of it. Nathan's heart pounded violently in his chest. His fingers curled into fists, his entire body shaking, as the reality of what had been happening behind his back hit him like a freight train. Sarah had betrayed him, with his own father, and the child he had been raising as his own, not even his. He clenched his jaw so hard that it hurt. You disgust me, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Sarah flinched. Robert, however, seemed utterly unbothered. Come on, son. You had to have seen it coming. You were too busy playing businessman while I was the one keeping your wife company. Nathan snapped. Before he could think, before he could control the rage boiling inside him, he threw the first punch. His fist collided with Robert's jaw, sending the older man stumbling back. Sarah screamed. Robert wiped his lip, grinning even as blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. There's that fight I was waiting for. Nathan didn't stop. The betrayal, the anger, the years of trust that had just been shattered beyond repair, it all exploded out of him. He tackled Robert to the ground, punching him again, and again, and again. Sarah tried to pull him off, but Nathan was too far gone, too consumed by fury, until suddenly he felt cold metal press against his temple. His body froze. He looked up, his heart stopping. Robert had a gun pressed against his head, and he was smiling. Now, Robert murmured. Let's not get carried away. Nathan's breath hitched as he felt the ice-cold barrel of the gun press against his temple. His pulse thundered in his ears. The room blurred, his mind racing for a way out. Robert's smirk never faltered. He had the upper hand, and he knew it. You're just like your mother, Robert taunted. Too emotional. Too weak to see what's right in front of you. Nathan's fists tightened, but he didn't dare move. One wrong move, and it was over. Sarah stood paralyzed a few feet away, her hands covering her mouth. Robert, please, she whispered. This isn't how it should be. Robert scoffed, never taking his eyes off Nathan. It's exactly how it should be. You made this mess, sweetheart. Now we're cleaning it up. Nathan ground his teeth. You really think you'll get away with this? Robert chuckled, pressing the gun harder against Nathan's skull. Oh, I don't plan to get away with anything, son. I just need to make sure you understand how things are now. Nathan's jaw clenched. His blood boiled with rage. His own father had stolen everything from him. His wife, his child, his family, and now he was trying to steal his very life. But Nathan wasn't going to let that happen. Not without a fight. He exhaled sharply, forcing his body to relax, just slightly. If Robert thought he was giving up, he'd lower his guard. And that was all Nathan needed. "Fine," Nathan muttered. "You win?" Robert raised an eyebrow, clearly suspicious. Sarah gasped. "Nathan, no." Nathan moved in a blur. With one swift motion, he grabbed Robert's wrist and yanked it sideways, forcing the gun away from his head. The shot fired. A deafening explosion that sent Sarah screaming. But the bullet buried itself in the ceiling. Nathan slammed his elbow into Robert's gut, sending him staggering back. The gun clattered to the floor. Robert lunged for it. Nathan was faster. He kicked the gun away, sending it sliding across the room. Robert growled in frustration. But before he could react, Nathan threw a savage punch to his face. The impact sent Robert crashing into the coffee table, breaking it in half. Nathan didn't stop. Years of rage, of betrayal, of pain, it all boiled over. He pummeled his father, blow after blow, unleashing everything Robert had stolen from him. Robert coughed, blood splattering on the floor. "You!" he croaked, laughing despite the pain. "Still? Think you're the better man?" Nathan grabbed him by the collar, yanking him up. His chest heaved, his vision red with fury. "You ruined my life," Nathan seethed. "You took everything from me." Robert's bloody lips curved into a smirk. "No," he whispered. "She let me take it." Nathan's breath caught. His grip tightened. His entire body screamed to end this, to finish what his father had started. And then, sirens. The distant howl of police cars rushing toward the house. Sarah sprinted toward the window, peering outside. "They're here!" she sobbed. "Nathan, stop!" Nathan's chest rose and fell in rapid bursts. His grip on Robert wavered. The reality of what he was doing sank in. If he killed his father, he'd be no better than him. With one final shove, he let Robert fall to the floor, coughing and groaning in pain. Moments later, the police burst into the house, guns raised, shouting commands. Nathan stepped back, hands in the air. Robert wasn't so smart. He tried to run. An officer tackled him to the ground, pinning him down as another officer slapped handcuffs onto his wrists. "Robert Caldwell, you're under arrest for kidnapping, assault, and attempted murder," the officer barked. "You have the right to remain silent." Nathan stood frozen, his body trembling. Sarah collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Robert, lying there in cuffs, bloodied and defeated, still managed to grin. As they dragged him toward the door, he turned his head, locking eyes with Nathan one last time. "You'll never be free of me, son," he whispered. Nathan said nothing. As Robert was shoved into the police car and the doors slammed shut, the night finally fell silent. But for Nathan, the damage was already done. His father was gone, but his world would never be the same again. The house felt hollow without the chaos. The echoes of sirens had faded, leaving behind an unbearable silence. Nathan stood in the living room, his knuckles bruised and raw, staring at the shattered remnants of his life. The broken coffee table, the overturned chair, the dried blood on the floor. All reminders of the night that had destroyed everything. Sarah sat on the couch, her hands trembling, as she clutched a blanket around her shoulders. She hadn't spoken since Robert was taken away. She looked drained, haunted. Nathan knew the truth now. It was undeniable. The DNA results had confirmed it. Dylan wasn't his son. He was his half-brother. A truth so twisted it made his stomach churn. The very son he had raised, the boy he had loved and nurtured, was the product of his wife's betrayal. Dylan walked in slowly, his expression shattered. He had heard everything. "Dad?" He hesitated, then corrected himself, voice barely above a whisper. "Nathan, what happens now?" Nathan swallowed hard, his throat aching. He wanted to tell Dylan that nothing would change, that they would go back to the way things were. But how could they? Everything had changed. "Dylan, listen to me," Nathan finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "No matter what that DNA test says, you're my son. You'll always be my son. That doesn't change." Dylan's eyes glistened, his jaw tightening. "But I'm not, am I?" His voice cracked. "All this time, I was a lie." Nathan shook his head fiercely. "No, you're not a lie. You're my son because I raised you. Because I was there for you. Because I love you." Dylan let out a ragged breath, rubbing his face, his emotions fraying at the edges. "I don't even know who I am anymore." Nathan's heart ached for him. He reached out, gripping his shoulder. "You're Dylan Caldwell. And no one, not me, not Robert, not your mother, can take that away from you." Dylan nodded weakly, but the pain in his eyes didn't fade. Nathan turned to Sarah. She finally met his gaze, her face hollow with guilt. I never wanted this," she whispered. "I never meant for it to go this far." Nathan let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Did you think it wouldn't?" His voice was hardened by betrayal. Sarah flinched but didn't argue. She knew she had no defense. "I loved you," Nathan continued, his voice cracking. "I gave you everything, and you threw it away for him." Tears slid down her cheeks, but she didn't try to justify her actions. "I was lonely, Nathan." She swallowed, her voice barely audible. "I was lonely, and I was weak, and I hate myself for it." Nathan stared at her for a long moment, his chest tight with emotions he couldn't even name. "Do you regret it?" he asked, his voice cold. She nodded, a fresh wave of tears falling. "Every day." But regret didn't undo the damage. Regret didn't erase the betrayal. Nathan exhaled sharply, steeling himself. Us." He motioned between them, the weight of it all crashing down on him. "It's over, Sarah." She squeezed her eyes shut, a silent sob escaping her lips. "I know," she whispered. Nathan turned away, running a hand through his hair. He had spent years building a life for them, sacrificing everything to provide for his family. But in the end, he had lost it all. And now, there was nothing left to fight for. He glanced at Dylan, his heart clenching. His son, not by blood, but by bond. And that was the only thing worth saving. Nathan looked at Sarah one last time. The woman he had once loved more than anything was now a stranger to him. "I'll call the lawyer tomorrow," he said simply. "We need to settle this." Sarah nodded, wiping her tears. "I understand." There was nothing left to say. Nathan took a deep breath, then turned to Dylan. "Pack your things, kid. We're leaving." Dylan's eyes widened. "What? Where are we going?" Nathan gave him a small, weary smile. "Anywhere but here." Dylan hesitated, then slowly nodded. Nathan took one last look around the house that had once been filled with love, laughter, and trust. Now, it was just walls. Just a place where ghosts of the past lingered. Without another word, he grabbed his keys and walked out the door. And for the first time in years, he felt free. Betrayal leaves scars that time cannot heal. Trust is fragile. Once broken, it may never be restored. Nathan lost everything, but he gained clarity. Blood doesn't define family. Love does. And while revenge brings momentary satisfaction, true closure comes from walking away and rebuilding. Nathan didn't need to fight for the past anymore. He was ready to embrace the future.